Today, we're going to talk about zip forms, as we have some newer agents in here that I hopefully have set up the templates. I think everybody in here has I've helped set up templates. Mark Chambers did that for me when I first started. So we're going to talk briefly about that and then kind of go through the contracts and addendums and go, okay, these are the things that you want to think about when presenting, because now, and it's exciting, some of you are getting some really good leads and some people are writing offers, and that's where we want to be, right? And we want to have the knowledge of how to write those, what kind of questions you need to ask your clients so that you can write them correctly. So we'll go over templates real quick. When you log into zip forms, you're probably not going to have transactions like I have here, right? I just started my third year, so I have 3 years. I could go all the way back of all the transactions that I've done, but each one is like their own file, right? And when you come in here, you go to templates, right? And I have 2 templates that I recommend. You have a buyer's packet and a listing packet, right? And you can see this in the buyer's packet. I have all of the documents that I'm going to use and need the most, right? So we have the residential buyer tenant rep agreements. We have the 1 to 4 family contract. We have the third party financing addendum. We have the addendum for properties subject to mandatory membership, which is the HOA. Addendum concerning the right to terminate due to the lender's appraisal. And then you have the EXP ABA. And then you have disclosure of relationship with residential service. And you have your IABS, and then you have the wire fraud, the buyer wire fraud. So these are the kind of the standard forms that you're going to be using. Some of these are just for you to upload to SkySlope for EXP, and some of them are going to be the ones that you fill out and submit in your offer. And we'll talk a little bit about that. If you need a form or to add a form to this template, you would go to all forms over here. When you click all forms, all right, you're going to make sure to do the drop down and go to Texas Realtors. All right, so there's different affiliations, but you want to just have Texas Realtors in here. And if you're looking for an addendum, you just start typing an addendum and it has different things in here for different forms. You see the one that you want, you go ahead and click it, and it automatically adds it to the template. All right, so that's what that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and go back and show you the forms that you should have in your listing packet. It's a few less, some are similar and the same, but this one you're going to have the wire fraud for the seller. All right, you're going to have the seller's disclosure notice. Again, I'm going over these so that if you need to set up your template, you can go in here, click this and start typing in sellers, and it'll auto-populate this one and you'll click it and add it. You'll have the residential listing, exclusive right to sell. All right, and then you have the disclosure of relationship with residential service again. You have the EXP ABA again. You have your IABS again. And then the T47 residential real estate. I didn't have this in there for the longest time, and I guess I got away with it. For whatever reason, I thought the title company took care of this. I was wrong. And I was like, well, I don't want to make that mistake again. So I made sure to put this in my packet. But you want to pretty much, when they're filling out the seller's disclosure, you'll also want them to fill out the T47 with their survey, if they have a survey, right? Pretty much saying that, yes, this is the survey that I have. It's accurate. And that goes along with it, right? So do we have any questions with any of that? Is there anything that I'm kind of forgetting? Any experienced people in here that go, ooh, this is a good one.
I'll add a little bit on that T47 because it's real easy to forget. But if you read the contract about survey, it says, you know, seller will deliver the survey and the T47. So it can't just be one or the other. It's got to be both. And the T47 has to be notarized.
Yeah. Yeah, super important. Luckily, I've never gotten in trouble with not having it. It's always been covered. Like it's been covered usually at the closing table. They're like, here's the T47 and blah, blah. But you should, as a real estate agent, put that up front, get it signed, get it notarized, because it is a way for the buyer to back out of the contract at the very last minute and pretty much get all their earnest money back. And now your seller's screwed. All right. So you want to take care of that. I think it's like within the first 3 days, there's a time limit that you're supposed to submit that. Again, the survey, how quickly you need to turn in the survey with the T47.
Yeah, and the time limit you put into the contract in the 1 to 4, and it's real important, deliver it as early as possible. Because once they get it, they have an amount of time to reject it. Same thing with your seller's disclosure.
Yeah.
You know, there's all kinds of things like that in the contracts, but that buyers can get out with.
Yeah, no, for sure. So moving on, we have those 2 templates, right? And you kind of want to have those set up. And then going back to the beginning of Zip Forms, you say you're writing up a contract for a new client, right? So you're going to click new right here, and you're on the buy side. So I don't know about any of these others. The only ones I've used are the purchase or the listing. Brian, do you use Zip Forms or do you use DocuSign?
I use Zip Forms and I use DocuSign still.
Okay.
Which it adds an extra step, but I don't really like signing in Zip Forms. I still like signing in DocuSign.
Okay, gotcha. Well, here we're going to be representing a buyer. I like to put, the name, right, of the client, and that's where it's going to show up right here, West Perkins. And then you just click residential. It's active, and right here you're able to put which packet that you want applied. So if I did that, so I would do the buyer's packets, and I click save, and it's going to auto populate Brad Toth's file here, right? So from here, there's a couple things that I like to do before I jump into the documents. But right here next to parties, I like to go in and fill as much information out as possible by adding buyer 1, all right? And I don't add everything, but I add the stuff that needs to go on the documents, all right? So I would add first and last name, right? I would add the email address, right? And usually the phone number, all right? And then I would put their address here. The reason that I do all this before I get into the documents is once it's here and saved, it'll auto populate in the forms. All right, so I don't have to like go one step at a time on each of the forms. So I think that's pretty important. All right, so just save some time. So once I have parties, obviously if it's a husband and wife, one of them is buyer 1, one of them is buyer 2. All right, you should, I believe it auto populates your information. But if it doesn't, then you'll want to put yours on there as well, listing agent, selling agent, so that it auto populates that stuff. Once that's ready to go, you're going to go to documents, and there's all kinds of tabs on here that I've never even clicked on or used, because I just focus on these couple things. All right. And this is really, in my opinion, all you need to get by with what you need to do. All right. So now we're in Brad Toth's file. All right. It automatically pulls up all the documents that I had from my buyer's templates. Right. And then I can start filling out these as I go. Me personally, the way I like to do it is I separate the forms into like 2 or 3 different emails. All right, I don't do like, here's the 10 forms that I need you to fill out. I try to make it a little bit more streamlined so it's not as confusing. So for me, the first email that I send out is the residential buyer agreement. All right, I send them my IABS and the wire fraud, typically. That's one email. So I'll start with just filling those things out. All right, so you click on it, and then your client would be Brad Toth. All of his information that I already saved would already be inputted here. If it's not, you would just simply click on it and write it in. All right. The broker information, is here, eXp Realty LLC. And I have this saved in my template, so it automatically populates like this. So I don't have to write it in every single time, right? And then the address here locally, and I put my phone number and my email address. Brian, stop me or correct me if you see anything wrong with this. These are things that I've been doing and nobody has said anything. Nobody's given me a red flag on anything.
You're good.
Okay, cool. Then the next one is you're pretty much filling out the yellow stuff, all right? But I would say that you should probably go back and kind of read all the other black stuff, right? And go, okay, what is this legal jargon that's kind of in this? You don't need to know it like memorized, but you need to kind of know it. And sometimes you learn it because people will ask you about it, or either your clients will ask you about it, or God forbid, the other agent's like, hey, well, did you know that this and this and this is in the contract? And you're like, oh shit, it does say that in paragraph 7A or whatever it is, right? Most of the stuff is pretty straightforward, but this is a San Antonio surrounding areas. This is the market area that we're going to be going in. And then the term would be, we're starting today. And typically what I've been told, at least in the San Antonio areas, we put like a 6-month window. I mean, if it's an in or out, you could make that window whatever you want, but pretty much it's saying that I am representing Brad Toth for the next 6 months and the home buying process. All right. Technically, at the end of that 6 months, we have no agreement and he could go use some other agent. But that's what I recommend putting here. You just put in the dates. And then here it will automatically populate the client's name and your name when you have it all filled out correctly. Of course, it's not there, but it would say Brad Toth and Tony Ruiz, and I think it says of eXp Realty. Again, once you have all this stuff filled out, it'll auto-populate here. So that's nice. This is NA because we're not a part of a relocation company. And so that just in NA. And then intermediary is pretty much always checked off. Have you ever seen a no intermediary status?
I've never run into that.
Yeah.
Well, only because I always encourage somebody, hey, you want intermediary status, okay? And of course, from our end, we think about it from getting both sides. Just you have to be very careful with that, of course, because but you might have a buyer or a listing that says, oh, I don't want you to be able to get both sides.
Right.
And you need to remind them, if they don't allow you to intermediary status, then that means nobody in your brokerage. That means your brokerage.
Yeah.
So that's why you always want to say, hey, you want to allow intermediary status so that other people in my brokerage can show the listing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So that's pretty standard. Just wanted to see if you had any experience with that. Again, I'm skipping over a lot of this black stuff. We're not going to go over every single paragraph in the contract. We're just kind of going over how to fill out the contract, right? So the commission, I always put 3% here. And technically, this paragraph reads that if for whatever reason the seller doesn't pay your commission, the buyer's technically responsible to pay that commission. I mean, some people you'll run into, they'll read all the little details and it's like, hey man, I'm not going to come after you as the buyer to pay that. 99.9% of the time, I'm assuming this is correct, Brian, that like the seller usually pays the commission. Now it might be reduced, it might not be a full 3%, but.
So technically, so there's a technicality, and I just point this up because I get hung up on it. The broker pays the commission.
Right.
Not the seller.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
The broker that's representing the seller.
That's right.
Right.
And I only bring that up because nobody realizes that. And that should come up when people are negotiating your listing commission, is because they don't pay it. The broker pays it. But yeah, I mean, you can put that there, and that's always a touchy thing, especially if it's a buyer you don't know real well. Because I mean, God, you want to enforce that? No, I'm never going to enforce that. Although technically it's up to your broker.
Huh?
You know, if you work in a private boutique place, a small brokerage, they could say, no, you make your buyer pay it.
Huh? That's interesting.
You know? Yeah.
This other one talks about 1% of the month's rent for a rental. I mean, you might run across that from time to time. But again, to me, when I'm presenting this, this is an agreement between me and the buyer that I'm representing, right? So I just leave it at the 3%. If we end up finding a rental, I don't typically go back and change this. And I've never uploaded this to EXP Skyslope and they've never said, oh, you got to change that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm in the wrong, but that's what I've been doing. These next ones talk about construction, and these are all NAs. I do a protection period of 5 days. What's standard in DFW for the protection period here?
Well, I usually push it. I usually put 30.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Although you have to read this carefully because I mean it does protect you a little bit, but notice in the paragraph it says unless they've signed an agreement with another realtor. See, if this expires and they sign an agreement with another realtor, then you're out. Doesn't protect you really.
Yeah.
And it has to do with it if they're in the MLS. But I usually put 60 days.
Okay. Yeah.
It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, to me, it doesn't really matter. And I always kind of tell them, sometimes you'll run across the clients that are weary of signing anything because now they're committed to,
Yes.
I'm working with you. I'm like, look, sign this. If tomorrow you go, I don't want to work with you anymore, then we'll just tear it up and be done with it. Like,
well,
I'm not taking you to court over this.
And you know, I started to spend so much time on this. This is a great document. But if you go back to that market area, like if they're afraid to work with you, if you're picking up a buyer from an open house or somebody you don't know, and they're interested in the house, they can write in the market. You can write in the market area just that house, the address. You know, or you can put a time limit of whatever you want, because what I say to people is this is a going steady document. It's not a marriage document. You know, you're not stuck with me. If we don't get along for one way or another, you can walk away from it.
Yeah, like that. The county, whatever county you're in, Tarrant County up there, Bear County down here. And then in here, most of this stuff I don't check off. I have the IABS, I guess technically, because remember, we're looking at all types of properties. So are you going to send the lead disclosure thing if we're looking at newer homes? Probably not. But if you do come across one, then you'll send that with your contract that you're submitting. Special provision. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm in 2 counties. How do I pick depending on where the house is?
No, that's a great point. The county really, all that needs to reflect is where your broker is.
Okay.
So for us, you would just put Dallas County.
Okay.
Is that, or whatever broker office you're signed up with?
Collin County, I think. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you. Talk to us, Brian, about special provisions. I've never put anything in special provisions on this one.
Stay out of special provisions.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much
Yeah.
What I've always said is that all the addendums are there. Just find the right addendum for any situation that you need.
The only time I might put something in there is if I'm going to reimburse, maybe, you know, and if it's somebody that wants some kind of rebate,
okay,
I might put it there. But man, I would advise everybody to stay out of special provisions if possible. Cool. Because you get into that where you're accused of practicing law.
Yeah, that doesn't sound fun.
No.
So at the bottom here, we have our signatures, right? Broker's printed name, the license number, all right? And then you're the broker associates, that you are that person. That kind of confused me at first, but you're the associate. Yeah. So you sign, you put your name here. And then when we put the signatures on, this is where your signature would go. We'll show you that in a second. Your client's printed name, it should be auto-populated here. once you have it up there. And then the signature and dates will be filled in when you do the signatures, the e-signatures. So that's the,
Hey,
go ahead.
go scroll down to, I think it's paragraph 11. No, it's for the liability clause. Somebody pointed this out to me yesterday.
This one.
Limitation liability. You'll read that paragraph real quick. And this is if somebody gets hurt when you're showing or something. You know, read this. Because somebody pointed this out to me yesterday and I had never noticed this. But all it says, neither the broker nor their associates will be held liable. It's a hold harmless agreement. But if you read that last sentence, client will indemnify broker against any claims or injury. Well, it just says client. Okay, so that means, you know, the husband and the wife, they're both their names. Don't just do husband and wife separate, get them both on here. But the bigger thing that somebody pointed out is, what if they start bringing all these friends to your house showings? See, especially if you're showing farm and ranch property, maybe.
Okay.
You know, somebody gets snake bit or somebody falls down the stairs. Okay, you're not responsible, but it's only the client. So if they start bringing buddies and family, that's a problem. And I never thought about that. They could sue your ass, or sue your brokers. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to ask an attorney to draw up a little waiver. So if people show up with, you know, grandma and grandpa, hey man, why don't y'all sign this real quick? I know that seems kind of dumb.
Yeah.
But man, the more you think about it, the more you go, huh? And you got to start reading these contracts like lawyers, kind of.
Yeah, and they're like written like lawyers, but sometimes we're like, what is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the one that confused the hell out of me forever was,
And recently we had to kind of finagle it, was the appraisal addendum.
Oh God, that was
That
terrible.
one gets a little confusing. It's like,
But-
I still have to think about it. It was me, Mark Chambers, and Alan Grulich going, it goes like this.
That one makes my head hurt every time I look at it. I'm like, oh my God, not another appraisal addendum.
Yeah. But, you know, if you are confused or if we can't figure it out, you can always go into the Texas State Broker Room in the world, and they typically, broker will go, yeah, you're supposed to do this. This is what you want to do. You feel like this. So that's always amazed me. I've used it a handful of times and how quick they are about answering your questions. And obviously they are the brokers, so they should be the most knowledgeable about it.
Yeah.
The IABS is pretty straightforward, and sometimes you have to upload this. You could find this on SkySlope. I actually have to update mine because Rick Tinkersley is not there, right? In that position. So I have to go find my new one. And what I do is I find it in SkySlope and I download it to my desktop, right? And then I upload it into zip forms, all right? And you'll want your information here. This will probably change from time to time, like it has recently. So I have to go get the updated one. And guess what? Those people will move on at some point and we'll have to update it again. So just make sure that you have the most up-to-date form in your IABS there.
So if you're a new agent, what is that form for? You know, like Colin, are you on here?
Yep.
What does that form do?
The form is to inform of your broker services.
Yes, that's great, man. I couldn't have answered that my first year. It explains the service. So like when we were talking about people not wanting to sign buyer's rep, is the buyer's rep allows you to give them the full service. And they become a client instead of a customer. But like I've had people not want to sign the IABS.
It's not required, is it?
Well, it's required by the brokerage.
Yeah.
Okay. But it is required on your first substantive discussion about real estate. It is required for you to present it.
Present it, but not to get it signed necessarily.
That's correct. But I mean, I've had people go, oh, I don't want to sign that. I don't want to sign that. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's just a brochure,
Yeah.
you know, but it's really important and it really makes a lot of sense. And it's actually rewritten from when it was when I first started, and it actually is a lot better. Anyways,
The wire fraud is just signatures, really. I mean, and I mean, we're not going to spend too much time talking about it, you know, and reading all this stuff about it. But you know, it makes them aware and not to be a victim of wire fraud. And when you're talking about money moving around and wire transfers, make sure that you contact your lender, contact your title company, and make sure that you're sending it to the correct wire, because this does tend to happen. I had somebody really weary. I was representing the seller, but they were a buyer in South Africa and they were wiring funds. And he was super worried about it, almost backed out on the deal the last minute. And is like, hey, look, this is from the title company. This is the wire instructions, etc. Any experience with that?
other than, you know, this is a cover your apples thing, man. That's what these things are about. And that's why you need to get it signed early in the process. But I don't get involved in their wire stuff. I just tell them to contact the title company directly.
Yeah.
But it is super important because it's like a huge problem. I mean, they get one digit wrong on their information, they may or may not get their money back.
Yeah, that is
Mhm.
true. So yeah, when you're working with the buyer that's doing that or doing a wire transfer, just make sure that they're in good communication with the title company. And again, I don't get in the thick of it, but like I'll call the title company and say, can you please send me the wire instructions to me? I'll forward them to them and send it to my buyer as well, so we know exactly what it should look like. So these are all forms that you're going to have to upload. EXP expects you to upload to SkySlope, and they check them off and approve them, and or they say, hey, this is filled out wrong. You need to do it again. So just remember that. So that's the first email that I send out, and then usually I follow up with the contract because that's the exciting point part, right? That's the like, hey, we're putting in an offer, right? So let's go over the 1-to-4 family contract. Up here are going to be the seller's information, right? Whether that be a single person or a married couple. All right, you're going to put in their official name, their legal names here. All right, and that will auto populate here. And then your buyer's names, legal names, will go on this document here. All right. Here you're going to fill out the lot, the block. This information I always grab right off of the MLS. Usually the MLS is accurate with pulling that information from the county records, but you could also go and double check that with your appraisal district. All right, we have Bear County Appraisal District. You can pull up the address and it'll give you the legal definition of the lot number, the block number, etc. I usually just use the MLS, but sometimes if it's not there and it's not filled out correctly, you might want to double check with your appraisal district. The addition is the neighborhood that it's in, right? That'd be like Stone Oak here in San Antonio, all right? And then city of, you know, maybe it's not in San Antonio, it's a house in Converse, right? Or whatever city y'all are at. There's so many cities up there in DFW. So you want to make sure that this is all representing the property of the house that you're submitting for. The county, whatever county you're in. And then finally you get to the actual address down here, known as, and it says address and zip code. So you type in the address and the zip code. All right, I think the zip code is there. Right, so you'll have all of that filled out. The exclusions, I've never experienced any exclusions. I usually just have that as an NA. But I guess if you want to, hey, we want to buy this house, but we don't want the shed in the back or something like that. I'm guessing that would be something like that. Brian, anything with that?
Does your MLS list exclusions on your listings? Is there a section for that?
I think there is. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't,
I-
probably should look at it a little bit closer.
Well, on ours is similar, I think, to Austin. Last time I looked at Austin's MLS, their system.
Yeah.
And so ours will list the description, the general description, this is a 3-bedroom, wow, fantastic, whatever. And then it'll say exclusions. And so if the listing agent has done their job right, anything the seller wants to exclude will be listed.
Hmm.
So that's, of course, that's anything that's permanently attached. Now, sometimes people will put things that aren't really permanent items just to let you know. But if there's a listing, like if you're doing a listing and if there's anything questionable that might disrupt the closing, if it's not there when it closes, you want to exclude it. So, I've had clients that had, rocks that they put in their gardens that they paid for that they're taking.
Right.
And so that's, you want to exclude that, even though it's not technically permanent. But yeah, I have exclusions a lot up here.
Okay. Yeah.
You got to pay attention, especially to TVs, because the TVs don't have to be excluded, but the mounts do. The mounts have to stay unless they exclude them.
Wow.
And then you have to have the discussion with the buyer. Okay, if we make them remove the mounts, well, then those holes have to be repaired.
Right.
What is that going to look like when you move in?
Yeah,
So,
I guess my experience on that is we just kind of negotiate that technically by word, and sometimes we'll write it up like in not necessarily, I guess, just an amendment. Just say, hey, these things are staying or going, or hey, my buyer's interested in this staying. But I guess
yeah,
technically they should be written exclusions or inclusions.
man, from a listing point of view, if you want your exclusions out in the open,
Yeah, I agree with that. I almost screwed up there once with some blinds.
anything that's questionable, I've had sellers where they had some special antique, light fixture and didn't ever tell me, and I should have asked questions when I was taking the listing, like, oh, you got to take that. And they took it and put up a little cheapy thing. Well, but they didn't say beforehand, and that caused a big stink. A lot of that can be avoided, but you have to watch out for tricky things too, like built-in fridges. Because I had a listing, this was my third year, I had a listing where I thought the fridge was built in because it had wood trim on the front of it,
Yeah.
but it wasn't built in. And so the seller or the buyers came in and they're like, their agent was like, hey, where's the refrigerator? And I'm like, it's not there. I thought it was a built-in. They said we did too, but it wasn't a built-in.
Yeah.
And my people had taken it. And I was like, ooh. And when that happens, you're usually giving up a little money.
Yeah, I've done that too.
So if you haven't had the experience of giving up a little money to make a closing happen, well, there's still time.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, exactly, to try to do that stuff up front so you don't put yourself in that position. When you do give up money to make that closing happen, you definitely learn a thing or two from that. And you're like, oh,
Okay.
I don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
The next one is sales price, right? You're offering $350,000 and you're putting, well, let's just use $300,000 and you're putting down 3.5%. And I think if my math is correct, I think it's like $9,500. Yeah, something like that. And then you do the difference to get you up to that. I'm trying to do quick math here and it's not really working. But anyways, you type in a number and this is the down payment. So you do want to know, hey, buyer, how much do you plan on putting down? Yeah, you could put down as 3.5% on an FHA loan, or are you putting down 20% on this conventional loan? Right. And then, okay, we're offering $350,000 and 20%. I know that you're putting down, that's the number that would go here. And then you do some quick math and put the difference here. And this is the offer price, the bottom one, which auto populates once you plug in the down payment and once you put in the financing here. you also want to click third-party financing addendum right here. I haven't used any of these, the loan assumption addendum or the seller financing addendum. Pretty rare, in my opinion. Or sometimes you have a very wealthy buyer and they say, hey, we're paying cash. All right. And we're gonna go 350. All right. And this is gonna be 0. And that's our offer price. So when a listing agent sees this, they go, oh, we got a cash offer. All right. They're bringing $350,000 to the table. So that's how that's filled out.
Hey, Tony, go back to where the, oh, no, under 350,
Yep.
line B, click on that.
Yep.
Now click your space bar. Now you can type in a number. So if you want to put a 0 in, a lot of people don't know that. If you want to put a 0 in, that's how you put 0 in. You have to click on that and put it in space bar.
Okay. All right.
And this is where a lot of, especially younger agents or old tired agents, will make a mistake and forget, they'll get the down payment mixed up with the sales price and it'll be in the wrong box.
Yeah.
Which usually, you know, the other agent will go, hey, you need to fix that. However, if you're in a multiple offer situation, you don't really get another shot at it. You want to always go back and read over your offer real close to make sure you didn't make a little mistake like that. I've caught myself doing it, you know, on those weekends when we're doing 3 or 4 deals and it's 11 o'clock at night and you're tired. That's the kind of mistake you'll make.
Yeah, and I've seen some agents when it got crazy this past summer. Some listing agents are like, if it's not a filled out contract correctly, we're not even going to present it, which
Right.
technically is illegal, isn't it? I mean, I've always been
Well-
told you have to present all offers.
Well, but it depends on what you got wrong.
Yeah,
Because say you filled out the address by mistake. Well, technically, it's not an offer on that property.
that's true. Yeah, yeah. And so,
And your buyer could be buying the wrong house.
yeah, the very first offer that I wrote up, it took me like 45 minutes to do, maybe even longer, and I got like a serious headache because I was like stressed out about like I got to get this right. So we've all been there before. But I always recommend if you're submitting an offer and you wanted somebody to double check it, send it to Brian, send it to send it to Mark. We can look at it quickly and go, oh, you didn't fill this little box in. Make sure you fill that out. All right. Or this needs to be clicked off. So just FYI.
Yeah.
The leases, usually it's not, if they're buying a house, most of the time, single family house. All right. But if you're like, I'm talking with a guy that wants to buy a multifamily property, right? And there's leases that he's taking over, right? So this pretty much says, hey, we want to see those leases that are in place. All right. Residential leases most of the time. And then we have this fixture leases with solar panels. I haven't had experience with solar panels, but there might be a lease on some solar panels. You want to ask the listing agent, what's up with that? Are they owned? Are they leased? What is it? Natural resource lease, oil and gas. Most of us aren't really working out in, farm and land, but that deals with that. And then seller has delivered to buyer a copy of all natural resource lease. This goes with C, etc. Anything on this, Brian?
Yeah, actually, yes. So residential leases, if you're showing, say, an investor,
Right.
okay, and they've got a tenant there, that's the tenant gets to stay in the house until the end of their lease.
Yeah.
That's why this is on this contract. The other part of fixture leases, if you look on the very end of that, it says security system. Because, and I ran into this once, sometimes those security things are leased. And so, your buyer shows up and they're like, hey, where's my security pad? Well, the company came and took it. That's something that should be excluded in the sale, but a lot of times that's missed.
Okay.
And then the natural resources, it's very rare that you can have oil and gas or something in a subdivision, it does happen. But if the seller has to reserve those rights in order to keep them, and there's a special amendment addendum for that, okay, reservation of oil and gas. If they don't do that, then everything conveys if it doesn't, if they do have anything. But I mean, like if it's gas, I mean, okay, 10 cents a year you're gonna make,
Right. Right.
not a lot. But man, the longer I do this, the more I realize there is nothing unimportant in these contracts. There's stuff that we skim through and we're like, oh, this really is a bunch of nonsense. We don't really need this. But let me tell you what, there is hardly anything that isn't really important.
Yeah.
And I would recommend that you print these out, print out your 1 to 4, print out your buyer rep, listing rep, keep it on your desk and read it from time to time.
Yeah, and this is a newer section. They
This is
just
brand new.
added this, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, maybe a little bit
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah.
So going on, I agree. And I was just thinking some of this probably seems a little overwhelming, especially to a newer agent. Again, you have resources in us, and obviously Brian's more experienced. That's why I'm asking him a bunch of questions. And if all else fails, go into EXP World and talk to a broker and go like, hey, how do I fill this out? Right. And they are there. After hours might be tough, and somebody can help you. All right. So earnest money. All right. You write in the escrow agent. So it's not technically the escrow agent, it's the title company. All right. So the name of the title company goes here. And usually the listing agent will have that on the MLS. Please use North American Title as a title company. As the buyer rep, you don't really have much say to that. You just say, okay, that's the title company we're using. And then the address of the title company goes here. All right. And then the earnest money is typically 1%, at least here in San Antonio. So, $300,000 house, it's going to be $3,000. All right. The option fee has in San Antonio been $10 a day. So whether that be a 5-day option, it's $50, up to $100 for a 10-day option. So you would plug in whatever number that is. 7-day option, it's $70. I have changed a couple of these things, and we wanted to make a really strong offer, and my buyer had a bunch of money, and we put down like a lot of earnest money here. All right. And it's like pretty much he's risking that if anything was to screw up, and that earnest money could be to the seller, but it just kind of proves to the seller like, hey, we're extremely serious about this. We really want this house, and this is how much money we're putting up. So that could be different. And then here, additional earnest money, pretty rare, and usually doesn't go in here. An addendum, an amendment is a spot if you need to add more earnest money for a longer period of time for your option. That's a possibility. And then this is that's for that. The termination option is the 5-day option period to the 10-day option period goes here. 5, 7, 10 is what I usually put in there. Anything on that, Brian?
This is a great place if you have multiple offers, it's your option fee. Now up here, we generally don't see option fees less than $100. And if it's 300,000 or more, it's usually pretty steep. Like it's not uncommon to see $300 or $500 for option fees here. But you're in a multiple offer, you may want to talk to people about, hey, putting some serious money down there, because if they were serious about the house. Now, the additional section, I do use that sometimes when I'm writing a backup offer.
Okay.
And that's a way where we can put, because on a backup offer, you still have to deliver earnest and option, okay? Just like, and the contract. So I put a small amount in the first box, like $100 for earnest money, very small, and then put a larger amount in that box to deliver later. And there's a way to write that into special provisions too, but that's how I generally do it. And that keeps you from putting a big earnest money down and tying your buyer's money down.
Yeah,
But it's super important, like make sure that buyers understand that they don't have an option period unless they pay for it.
sure.
And fortunately, now this is all done at the title company all at one time, man. Back in what seems the old days, which was just a year ago, man, we were running around having to get into offices and getting signatures and stuff. It was a pain.
Well, yeah, and the option money went directly to the seller,
The seller or you took it to their office.
right, or the seller's agent, etc.
Yeah.
You know, but now it all goes to the title company. Which is
Yeah.
streamlined.
And you do have to keep in mind the days, like I try to get all of that done like by the second day of the contract and no later.
Yeah, you don't want to wait to the last minute. You're like, oh, 5 o'clock on the 5th day or the 3rd day, and
Yeah.
sure.
And also note, and this is in the contract now, it didn't used to be in the contract, but your option period ends at 5 PM on the last day of option.
Yeah, not at midnight,
Yeah,
5 p.m.
yeah, that's actually the best thing ever in contracts. It's 5 PM on option day.
Title and survey. For the longest time until we got into a super competitive market, I always saw the seller was paying for these things.
Mhm.
But this is the title company would go here again, but you might say, hey, do you have the cash to, make your offer stronger? We're going to go ahead and pay for title. Of course, that saves money and for the seller, and it makes your offer more attractive. All right, if you're competing. But a lot of times, usually the seller pays for that, but there is an option for the buyer to pay for it. Can you talk to me a little bit about this? This one kind of confuses me. Will not be amended or deleted from the title policy, or
Yeah, those are shortages in the survey, and it's actually, that's a great place to put, if you have a buyer, that's a great place to put buyer will pay, because it's like a $50 item. And all that means is if the survey is wrong, it's insurance to cover that, basically. And most people will put not be amended to, but I think it's actually better to put amended to, and then I just have my buyers pay it.
okay,
Usually. Oh, also,
Yeah.
on surveys, don't forget, if your buyer is paying cash, you don't have to have a survey.
that's true. I did
So-
remember that. Yeah,
It's, a lot of people will forget about that, but like if you're able to pay cash, you don't have to worry about survey because there's no lender.
good point. Speaking of survey, usually I click here, and I think I put within 3 days, because that survey, a good listing agent already has that survey with the T47 usually uploaded in the documents on the
Yeah.
MLS. All right. So if they don't, we could back out if they don't provide that to us.
Yeah.
A new survey, who's going to pay for the new survey if needed, right? And sometimes a good listing agent will say, we don't have a survey. They'll tell you that up front, and then you would click on this one, all right? But then this one says, hey, we have a survey with a T47, but if it's not approved for whatever reason, who's going to pay for it? But
Right.
if there is no survey, right, then it's the second one is going within blank days, the buyer shall obtain a new survey at buyer's expense. So are you going to pay for one? Is the buyer going to pay for one? And usually I put like 21 days. I give it a few weeks, maybe 14 days to get a survey out there. And then this third one is, hey, we need one, and the seller is going to pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and just under that first choice, under choice 1, you have to deliver the survey and the T47. Okay, so a lot of times they'll have the survey, but they'll forget to put the T47. So you have to watch that, because that's an out for a buyer.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. And luckily I never had that, but I was warned, they're like, hey, get your T47 in. Say, okay. This is residential use, is what I've been told to put here. And I always do 5 days after we receive it. Um, Objections. This is in for the survey, correct, Brian?
Uh,
Or title?
that's objections to the survey. I actually never put anything in that blank. Um, and, and this is also, say you're buying a piece of property and it doesn't have a pool, but your buyers want to put in a pool. So this is where you would put in a pool. Because if a pool can't be installed and they find that out during the process, they can back out of the contract and receive their earnest money back. That's what that's for.
Okay.
So if there's anything, like, well, I don't know if Airbnb, if you can put that in there, but because that's a whole can of worms right there. But stuff like that, like most common thing is pools.
Okay. That's good to know. I got this from Mark Chambers.
Yeah, I never actually put residential use because it's redundant.
Sure. All right.
You can kind of read that like, well, because it says if you object to it being used for that, if there's an objection to that use. So anyways, it's,
I have to adjust that.
and I usually, if I don't, I usually put NA there if I don't have anything.
Yeah. This next little checkbox is if the property is in a HOA or not, right? Pretty straightforward. And then coming down here to the seller's disclosure, usually the good listing agent will have that in the documents. So if you have, go and download it, have your buyer sign off on it, review it, obviously, see what has been disclosed. So you would either check the first one and says, yes, we already received it. Or if they don't have it there, all right, you go, buyer has not received the notice and we need that within 3 days, is usually how we fill that one out. And then you don't need a, remind me, I've been told this, you don't need a seller's disclosure when you're flipping a house. Is that right? You haven't lived in the house.
That's right. There's 2 or 3 situations where you don't need a seller's disclosure.
Yeah.
But so if somebody's selling the house that's never lived in it, they're not required to do a seller's disclosure.
Right.
But again, if you're on the listing side, I would recommend putting a seller's disclosure at all costs, because the more disclosure, the better. But so on this section, if you're in multiple offers, you will always check box 1. Okay. Unless they have not put it on MLS and you have not received it. If it's not available, never check that. Okay. Because if it's not on MLS and you check that, like they've seen it, you're screwed and your buyer's screwed. Okay. So you check that, like if you pull it on MLS and they fill it out with the offer and you send it over, you can check that. Box 2, if you're not in multiple offers, that's a leeway where you can have a good buyer's out. And I've actually used that several times. So anyways, and it's a gray area as to whether posting it on MLS is delivery or not. Yeah, that is still kind of argued, because there are agents that go, oh, well, I put it on MLS. Well, that's not really delivering it to the buyer. And so that's kind of a gray area. Like, so when I'm listing, I always make sure, like day 1 of the contract, I say, hey, here's the seller's disclosure if they didn't send it back with their offer.
Gotcha. Okay. That's a good little nugget to think about. This is funny, and I see a meme about this all the time, but we always click buy, buyer accepts the property as is. But we don't, because we usually do an inspection and then come back and say, hey, you need to fix this and this and this. But the way that I understand this is we accept it as we see it now. Of course, once we know more about it at the inspection, then we're gonna do an amendment and get repairs done. Right now, if you see something that's obviously needs to be repaired, then you can click 2 and list things or see attached of, hey, we want to buy this property for this amount of money, but it needs this work done that we see. That's my understanding of this.
Yes. Yeah, and we typically don't use box 2
Yeah.
now. And it has nothing to do with the inspection. You're right. And like, you know, if you check box 2, yeah, we're gonna buy the house, but we want you to fix the fence. You know, that's where you'd put it. And it just eliminates the separate addendum. But now, I just want to bring attention to the next section, lender required repairs. If you guys do a lot of FHA loans, FHA buyers, you may very well have lender required repairs. Has anybody had that yet?
I don't think I have.
It cannot be
but-
fun.
But they are a little bit more strict. All right.
Well, what happens on FHA and VA is they have an inspection. And FHA is especially notorious in that inspection because say the house hadn't been painted very well and there's any kind of paint missing on the house and they flag it for bare wood. And they insist that has to be repaired. So the lender can come through, and a conventional lender can do this too. And like a foundation, you know, they could require a foundation to be repaired. That's a big one. But FHA is real picky about stuff, and you can get this big old at the last minute when that appraisal comes in, hopefully more than a week before closing, and they say, hey, all this has to be fixed. What it doesn't say is who has to fix it. See, that does not mean the seller has to repair it. You know, and that's real important. And if you notice, it says cost, the last sentence, cost lender required repairs or treatments exceeds 5%. If the cost exceeds 5%, the buyer may terminate the contract and receive their earnest money back. And we've seen less of that, but I mean, FHA, I think, is going to get more prominent here coming up in the spring. And there's some buyers that that's just the way they have to do. It's just that in this market, FHA has been hard to compete with.
Yeah. Right.
But that's a big one, those repairs. I have had FHA with my buyers, and they even targeted a tool shed in the backyard, which isn't even part of the day, you know, but they included that and it had to be done. Crazy.
Wow.
Real estate is fun.
How many years have you've been doing this, Brian?
10.
Okay. You got us all beat all that experience. I love it.
Yeah.
It's good information to bring to the front and go, oh, maybe we should read this a little bit more in depth, like you said. You know,
Man, I'm telling you,
agents don't.
I kind of geek out over it a little bit. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. We like it. We're glad you're on our team here. So we're like, just ask Brian. He'll know about it. Residential service contract. This is where the home warranty. If you want to request a home warranty, it's usually like, I think I have one like for 450, 500, 550, somewhere in there. But you're pretty much asking the seller to pay for that. All right. And usually that's pretty standard. Again, this is another one. You go, hey, we're in competing. Do you want a home warranty buyer? If so, are you willing to pay that $500 for it and not ask the seller to pay for it, right? Because if you put anything here, you're saying, hey, seller, take $500 off of your money because we want it, all right? So it usually goes in, but if you're competing, maybe it doesn't. So talk to your buyer about, do they want one or not? And if they're willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
Brokers or sales agent, this is if you were representing yourself, all right? If the buyer is a sales agent, you would disclose that here. And then the closing dates, typically a month out. So if we're submitting an offer here, I usually just go 1, 2, 3, 4, put it on the 9th. And that usually it is enough time to process the loan. But if we're doing a cash deal, it could be 10 days. So we could go, here's 7 days, and we're going to try to close by the 23rd. So it's a little bit sooner. And maybe that helps out, especially if you're competing, right? But most lenders are going to want at least a 4-week window. Maybe they could push it up a few days, but go ahead and set that 4-week window.
And this is where you want to have a relationship with the lender. Okay, hopefully it's a lender of your preference that your buyer's using, but if it's not, you better get on the phone, because my preferred lender can close in 14 days. Now, he doesn't like to do that,
Right.
but he can. And so if you're in a multiple offer situation, that's an advantage, because maybe your person is already pre-approved, not just pre-qualified, but they're pre-approved, and all they need is a contract and underwriting.
Yeah.
And so you can do that in 14 or 15 days, and if that's the case, if you're going to make an offer like that, you have your lender get on the phone and call that agent and explain it to him.
Yeah.
How fast he can move. And it's the only thing you got to watch out for. It's got to be a lender that can do what he says
Sure.
or what they say.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was being sexist. I'm sorry.
Uh,
Accident.
the possession pretty much says most of the time it's going to be upon closing and funding is we're going to take over possession of the house, the property. All right. This other one is according to a temporary residential lease. If your client is getting out of their apartment and they need to be out next week, but they're in the process of this, can they possibly, if the house is vacant, is it available for them to move in early and sign a lease and pay for 2-3 weeks while everything's being processed? So that's a whole nother addendum that we can go over some other time. And then special provisions, again, standard, like kind of just stay away from it, right?
Yeah.
Brian?
Yeah. I mean, now your client can give you wording officially. Your client can give you wording to put in there. Okay. And technically, if I'm ever going to use special provisions, then I have talked to my title company's lawyer for wording and asked them to write something for my client. Because if you're talking to somebody, you don't ever want to say, well, I wrote that in there. Oh, no, you didn't ever write it in there. You either put an attorney's words in there or your client's words go in there. And that's why you're advised to stay out of it.
Sounds too complicated to me, so I just stay clear of it.
It can be an issue.
This 12B is if you are requesting the seller to pay for some closing costs, right? So maybe you have a buyer that really wants to get in, and I have used this early on, but again, in this crazy market that we've been in, I bet you better have closing costs because you're not going to be able to compete. All right. So right now, this is typically blank, but as we get into, maybe it's going to settle down a little bit and we're not competing as much. They might go, hey, we have 20% to put down, but that's going to drain all of our money. Like we don't have any more money after that. We can't cover the closing costs. Then you're going to put down, I usually put down about 6%, depending on the, $6,000. And talking to my lender here at the office, he says it could be anywhere between $5,000 to $8,000 in closing costs, depending on the price range of the house, depending on taxes. So even if it's a lower cost of a house, if it's in a high tax zone, that closing costs could be higher. So you want to kind of touch base with your lender and say, hey, we're submitting this offer for 123 Main Street. Can you give me a rough estimate of what those closing costs are going to be? Right, we're going to need all of it to be covered by the seller. So then you put in a number here that's going to cover that, right? So
yeah, and I use this a lot in multiple offers too, because say it's a $300,000 house, but your buyer needs $4,000 of closing. Well, you raise your offer to 304 and say, hey, we're asking for 304,000 closing. but we're gonna increase the offer to compensate for that.
Yeah.
And I do that a lot. Now, the only thing you gotta run into is appraisal, if the appraisal is an issue. But if there's value in the house, it just depends on whatever your buyer needs.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good way to move that money around. Obviously, if they qualify for that, and hopefully it's not an outrageous amount to where it does appraise, like you said.
Because it'll increase their loan amount, but it's not gonna increase their payment very much.
Sure. Yeah. More legal stuff that we should probably read more. In
Yeah.
on. But
Skip it though, you're better off skipping that page.
but for time's sake, we'll push on. And again, we should all, including myself, probably go back over these and just kind of read through them at least once or twice and kind of try to understand all that stuff. But the focus is, well, what are the blanks and how do we fill this out? Usually I put the phone number of the buyer and the email address, contact information. Usually don't have that over here. And then whatever addendums we're attaching to this offer, is it a financing? So we're going to need the third party financing. So you're going to check off all the addendums that you're going to have for this offer. It's in an HOA, so we're going to attach that. It's a conventional loan, so we're going to make sure that we can terminate if it doesn't appraise, right? So we're going to check that. It's an older home and it's lead-based paint, so we're going to make sure that we have the addendum for that. And another popular addendum that's not listed here is a non-royalty addendum, right? We want to have the refrigerator stay or something like that. Then we would add that here. So these are just check marks going. With this 1 to 4 contract, you should see these different addendums attached to it.
And you can also list the number of the forms. So like if it's a TAR 1501, you can put TAR 1501 or 24, whatever the number is at the bottom, you can also put that there. Because you might have one where you have several. And on notices, if you go back up to notices real quick, this is really important because this is where the title company is going to send stuff to buyers and sellers. And you, like Tony said, you may not have the seller information. That can be done after, or you can ask the listing agent, but it's important to have, especially an email for at least one of your sellers. And sometimes I'll just put I might put the seller and I put the listing address in there so that at least their stuff will be mailed to that house and it's their problem. Don't put CC and your information in here. Okay. A lot of people do that. Your agents are not in the contract. You're not a part of the contract. So don't put CC and then put your email address there. Leave it, just put buyers and sellers information only.
Okay. Attorneys, we don't deal with that. Have you ever dealt with that in a contract?
Hopefully not.
So that's usually all blank. This is going to be filled out by the listing agent. Once you've submitted your signatures and they've accepted, they will put the date that it was executed on. So if you're a listing agent, you'll go back and receive this contract and you'll put whatever date the last signature was on, right? Mm-hmm. So this is important because this starts your option period, right? And you go, okay, our option period is 5 days from this date at 5 p.m. You got to make sure that that's over.
So whatever date goes there, day one is the next day.
Yeah, exactly. That's always confusing a little bit. It's like, okay, you don't count that day. Day one's the next day.
And so
you think about that 3-day period that you have to get your earnest money, option money. So that's super important based off of this date. And then of course, it also starts your option period. So you figure out what that date is as well.
Yeah, I try to squeeze an extra day out of it if I can. If you're writing those offers and you send them at 11 o'clock at night, God, you hope they don't execute it then. You want it to be the next day.
Yeah. Over here, you fill out your broker information. This is all your stuff. eXp Realty, the license number, you're the buyer as a buyer's agent, information, clearly, and you do want to try to fill out all of this if they have it up on the MLS. It just helps the listing agent go, it's a more complete contract, all right, and they don't have to do the work, so it's more attractive to them, all right. So try to get all this information. They usually have that either in documents of this is my listing broker's office address and the supervisor. You should be able to find that. Most good listing agents provide that information. You just have to go through the MLS and get it and fill it out. All right. The percent of commission, this is important. You want to get paid for this. So typically it's 3%, but maybe it's less. Maybe they put 2%. I have heard of people trying to trick them and put 3%, and if they don't catch it, then hey, technically on this contract, I'm supposed to get 3%, even though you said the buyer only gets 2%. Does that,
Yeah.
would that fly?
Yes, that's a lie.
That's a lie.
Well, because whatever you could, if it's a 2.5% listing and you put 3, MLS supersedes that.
Okay. Okay.
MLS is a legal document.
Okay.
Okay, and because where was that determined? That was determined in their listing agreement.
Sure.
See?
Okay.
And so you can say, well, I always get 3%. Well, now, can you negotiate if it's a 2 or 2.5%? Can you negotiate that? Well, you can. It's not an easy negotiation, but you can.
Yeah.
The problem is, technically, it has to be a broker to broker agreement, because remember, the brokers are the ones getting paid. And so if you negotiate a low, and sometimes it's just not worth it, okay?
Yeah.
But you can negotiate it and say, hey, we really want this house. Now, if you're in a multiple offer, well, you got no chance, really.
Right.
But I've negotiated a low commission a couple of times, but it's a little tricky because it just means the listing agent has to do some more paperwork that they don't want to do.
Yeah.
So, and it does affect the seller's net, possibly. But sometimes you got to be careful. Like a lot of times, we want to give up, hey, we'll give up 0.5%, to make the deal work. But you don't know what's really happening on the other end. See, because if they agreed for a 6% listing, well, they don't necessarily have to give that to that seller. See? So, but anyways, for what we're talking about, it does not supersede the MLS. MLS is what stands.
So if it's a 2.5% listing, I would write 2.5%.
Yeah.
Whatever the listing says, that's pretty much what you put there.
And man, I don't know about San Antonio, but below 3% is a hot topic here.
Yeah, it's not terribly hot, but yeah, it's happening more and more.
It is, but I mean, people get bent out of shape about it up here. If people have listings that go for less, and there's some brokerages that do not allow you to list for less than 3% buyer's commission.
Yeah. All these blanks, you don't fill out. The title company takes care of this. All right. So that once they've receipted the contract, the listing side has signed everything. They send it off to title, and then they start filling out all this stuff. You turned in the earnest money within 2 days or 3 days or a day. They'll write down how much it was, all the information, and it's receipted. The contract's been receipted. This will be filled out. Typically, this one's not, because a lot of times there's not additional earnest money. And then the option fee, they receipt that as well. So all of this will be filled out by the title company on that. So that's something you don't have to do. So that's the gist of the 1 to 4. And I was hoping to go to different ones, but I really appreciate Brian being here with us and educating all of us on a lot of these paragraphs through this contract. We will have to pick up the other addendums because we're a little over time here another time, right? And we'll continue to do a deep dive. And, I need to go and read these a little bit more, and go, oh, you pointed out something that I didn't know, and I appreciate that, Brian.
Man, just what I would, because I mean, I didn't learn because I was smart, but find the best teachers in your area, like find what title companies have the best classes. And man, take classes from those really good, from the people who really know the contracts.
Hmm.
There's always something to learn, always.